Hi everyone! Welcome to the Deeper Roots YouTube channel. I'm Madeline. I'm so excited that you're joining me here today. I am pumped for this video because I'm actually answering one of the most asked questions that I get and that I've talked to people about, which is how do I actually start to grow a prayer life? How do I start praying consistently, regularly? How do I make that part of my life? Now, I think as Christians, we all want to have a great prayer life. We all want to have a vibrant prayer life. We all want to be able to connect with God in that way. But for a lot of us, it's a struggle. And it's a struggle because of really practical things like time, like knowing how to pray or how. Sorry, my cat just crawled on my lap. This is Miss Biscuits. Um, but it's a struggle for us and for a lot of reasons is what I'm trying to say. So really quickly, I want to share with you that actually in the link, so in the info of this video, there is a link to a PDF that has all of this information and more. So I'm actually not going to have time to go through all of the steps that I have for you guys today, but on the Deep Roots website, there's actually a resources page, and I'm going to link that for you, and that has a PDF with all of this information and more, and feel free to share that with anybody you think that would benefit from it, essentially. So that's going to have this information, but like a little bit more thoroughly. So I want to share with you 6 quick tips, practical, getting really practical for how to grow your prayer life or start a prayer life if you don't really have one. So the first one is find time. I know what you're thinking. I'm really busy. You have no idea what's going on in my life, and I don't have time to pray. Like I've tried before, and it just doesn't work. I would encourage you to look again, and specifically with these 2 strategies. First, look for and take advantage of natural lulls or pauses in your day. What I mean by that is how many times have you gone up to get in line for coffee, or you've had 10 minutes between meetings at work or school, and when you are standing in line or in that time, you find yourself on social media, you find yourself looking at the news, you find yourself kind of looking at Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, right? The truth is that we all have these natural pauses in our day, and a great way to get started on a prayer life is to take advantage of those natural pauses. How much would it change our lives if instead of looking at social media while we're in line for coffee, we sent up a prayer, a minute-long prayer, or a 5-minute long prayer. I had a friend at school who used to actually pray in between classes, and she would go into a bathroom stall, and for 5 minutes she would just kind of pray to herself to get some privacy, because that's the only place she could have privacy, and she would kind of just use that time to pray, and it was taking advantage of a natural pause in her day to do that. For those of you who are working, it might be a lunch break. For those of you who are taking care of babies, it could be your baby's nap time. I'm 37 weeks pregnant, so I know that my rhythm is going to have to change in that way too. But there are natural pauses in our day that we can take advantage of, and I challenge you to find those and to really take advantage of them for prayer, for the Lord, because why not? Another similar strategy is take advantage of the rhythms in your week. Find time in the rhythm of your week for what works for you. My challenge for you is to find 3 15-minute chunks of time in your week. Maybe even start with 2. Just 2 15-minute chunks of time where you're maybe a little less busy or you have a little less demand on your time. You might be thinking, I don't have that. But think about it. Think about your Saturday morning or Sunday morning before anybody else is up, or a weeknight after everybody else has gone to bed, and or you've gotten in bed and usually you would scroll on your phone. I think if we admit it, we all probably have 2 or 3 just 15-minute chunks in our week that we could really actually pray instead of do something less productive. And it can be hard to admit that, but I challenge you, look at the calendar for your week, find 2 or 3 15-minute chunks, and say, I'm going to resolve to pray during those times. I'm going to do what I need to do in advance. So maybe that's you tell your spouse, hey, can you watch the baby for 15 minutes? I'm just going to go upstairs in the room for 15 minutes and pray. And you resolve to pray during that time. And that leads to the second tip, which is protect that time. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was to look at your time with God as almost as a meeting. Like in our days when we are at work or we schedule a date or a coffee date with someone, we feel bad if we cancel on that. It's like a meeting, it's serious. And my advice to you is to start looking at your time with God in the same day. Once you've figured out what those 15-minute chunks in your day are, put them in your calendar as a meeting. And if somebody wants to do coffee with you during that time or do something else, really, really consider before you say yes. Think about it. Like, you have made that meeting time with God. And if you have to say no to protect that time, I think that we all want to pray, but it's almost like I'm going to schedule this prayer time as a default, and if something better comes along, then I will naturally do the better thing or the thing with people. But Jesus protected his time with God when he was here on earth. We see that he resolved to pray, and then he went to extraordinary lengths to actually be able to protect that time. He retreated into the wilderness to pray. And said that he made a frequent habit of that. He had a developed habit of going out alone into spaces and places that he could be alone with God. He protected that time. He drew boundaries around it. And he was the Messiah. He had people, more pressure on him than probably anybody. He had people clamoring around him at all times for breakthrough, for healing, for deliverance, for teaching. And he fiercely protected his time with God. And my encouragement to you is just to do the same. And that leads to the third thing, which is develop a rhythm. That's the third practical tip. So if we look at people in scripture, we see that someone like Daniel, who was in exile, he developed a rhythm of prayer with God. He prayed 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Now, maybe that's not the rhythm that works for you. Maybe there's different times in your day or different times in your week that are your rhythm. But whatever it is, develop a rhythm and stick to it. And what I mean is that we can't have just completely spontaneous, unstructured, sorry, there's a siren in the background if you guys can hear that, but we can't have just completely unstructured, spontaneous time with God, because if we do that, then it will never really happen. And the more that we make it a habit, and the more that we stick to those 3 15-minute chunks that we have, or those 2 10-minute chunks during the week, the more that we will develop relational intimacy with God. Because think about it, it's like in any relationship, there are things that are structured and unstructured, right? You spend time with your spouse every night, but you also have date nights, or your fiance or your girlfriend or boyfriend. You text with your friends, but you also have times that you get together intentionally. You talk once a week on the phone to your mom. And any good relationship building, there's rhythm. There's something you can depend on, and that builds relational capital. It builds trust. It builds intimacy, and it carves out time that you're actually saying, God, speak to me. I'm going to speak to you, and these are the times of my week that I am also, opening specially for you and for whatever you want to say to me. And that goes a long way. So my third tip for you is develop that rhythm, whatever it is, and stick to it. My fourth tip is start with structured prayer if you need to. So we can get into this kind of how of prayer where we're not sure what we're supposed to be doing, and we feel really uncomfortable and anxious. Like, we start praying and we're like, I'm talking to a wall. I'm talking to myself. I feel like I'm not getting anything back. Am I supposed to get something back? I don't know. And it can be really kind of disconcerting. So my advice to you is start with structure. You don't have to just kind of blindly go through it and say whatever comes and pops into your mind stream of consciousness to God. Instead, we can actually look at examples of structure that Jesus gave us in the Lord's Prayer. So when the disciples asked Jesus how to pray, he said the Lord's Prayer, and you're probably familiar with it. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It starts, so you probably know the rest of it. If not, you can totally look it up. But the great part about the Lord's Prayer is it actually provides us with a really neat structure of how we can pray. And what I mean by that is, I don't think that Jesus meant you always have to repeat these words mindlessly in order to pray. I think what he meant was actually these are kind of the components of prayer that you can kind of take advantage of. So the first part of the prayer is praise. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. That means actually like glorified. So praise. Then there's the part of the prayer that's surrender. Thy will be done. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Then there's a part that's confession. Forgive us this day. Forgive us our trespasses, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. That's actually on the PDF, or what that structure exactly is. But Jesus gave us different parts of that prayer, and we can kind of incorporate those into our own times of prayer with God and kind of go through it. So if you don't know where to start with praise. but make it unique to what's going on in your own life. Then go into confession, but with your own sins. Give us this day our daily bread. That's like petition what you need. Tell God what you need. So God gives us a great structure for prayer through the Lord's Prayer. But there are also other ways for structured prayer. There are a lot of great ministries where they write prayers. That's what they do for people. For example, Ransomed Heart is a great ministry that has a daily prayer that my husband and I take advantage of a couple times a week together. And that's, if you really don't know where to start, do that daily prayer a couple times a week in your prayer time. It's a really long prayer, so it'll probably take you 10 minutes. And the more that you kind of get used to praying in that way with that structure, then the more it might come naturally for you to pray in an unstructured way once you've just gotten used to talking with God. So start with structure. That's my fourth tip. If you really don't know how to pray in your prayer life, or you want to grow it and you feel like it's awkward, start with structure or incorporate some more structure. And then you might find yourself thriving more in your prayer life. The fifth tip, so second to last, is get creative. And what I mean by this is that we all have different ways of connecting with God, and there's no one right way to pray. So I might like to pray with music without words or in total silence. You might have to pray with worship music on, and you find it hard to connect with God without worship music on. I might pray kneeling on the floor. You might pray sitting. I like to pray walking around outside. I feel like connected with God in nature, but maybe that doesn't work for you, or you don't connect with God as much in that way. Find what works for you. Get creative. If you need to journal, journal. If you need to write, write. If you need to draw, draw. If you need to sing, sing. Just find what works. And what I mean by what works is what draws your affections and your intimacies closer to God, and do what works for you. Stick with it. And don't be afraid to put some variety in it, right? So one day I might kneel and worship God on the floor before I start praying. And one day I might go for a walk and pray to God as I'm walking. There's different ways that you can get creative in your prayer life that can kind of help you, jazz up your prayer life a little bit if it's getting a little stale. And that goes along with the sixth practical tip, which is variety is the spice of your prayer life. And I mean variety in how you're praying, the kind of prayer that you are engaging in with the Lord. Because the truth is, a lot of us maybe learned from a young age that there's one or two ways to pray, or prayers asking God for things, and then asking God to help other people, or asking God for things on behalf of other people. But the truth is, the scripture teaches us that there are so many ways to pray, as there are so many ways to engage with God. Just read through the Psalms, and there are so many ways that the psalmists engage with God, right? They are mourning, they are happy, they are praising, they are dancing. There's just so many types of prayer that we see, because there's as many types of ways to pray as there are, people, as there are relationships with God. So I wanted to share a couple of those with you. But I'm not going to share the whole list of kind of types of prayer. That's actually in the PDF that I mentioned in the link below. But a couple that I want to mention is intercession. Intercession is being like Jesus in that we stand in the gap for other people, or a country, or a place. So that means that as a believer, I believe that I have access to God that I can take advantage of by praying and lifting up other people to God. So that is I see a practical need, or someone is struggling, and I can go to God and I can intercede for them, and I can say, God, I know that you hear me, I know that you love me, and I'm lifting up this person to you and asking that you would help them, that you would love them, that they would experience peace. You're essentially praying for other people, but in a more targeted, intentional way. That's intercession. There are a couple other ones that I want to share with you. Surrender. I think surrendering prayer is the most important and one of the most powerful types of prayer that we can engage in. And I kind of start my day in prayer like this, where I will actually get at the feet of God, and I will put everything in my life at the feet of God and intentionally surrender my whole life. So I will literally go through, I give you my day, God. I give you these projects that I'm working on. I want you to be in them. I welcome your Holy Spirit into them. I give you my house. I give you my family. I ask that you would guide us. I ask that you would be with us. I surrender everything to you. I don't want to move in anything unless you move. And I kind of just surrender everything at the feet of God. And this is a really, really powerful way to pray. It's in the Lord's Prayer when Jesus says thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So your will be done, God. This is your kingdom come in my life, your will be done in all of these different parts of my life. And it's amazing the peace I feel after I do this, guys. Like, really, I would encourage you to do it, and try surrendering in that way if you haven't in your prayer time. And the last one I'll share with you is just listening prayer. So a lot of us think of talking with God as kind of a one-way thing, and we know that maybe God's supposed to respond, but we're not sure how. And I would encourage you to quiet your soul for even just 5 minutes of your prayer time. Just quiet yourself and just listen. Start by praying, God, I believe you say in your word that your sheep know your voice, and so I'm just sitting here. I'm going to quiet myself, and if you want to respond in any way to any of the things that I've prayed today, go ahead, I'm listening. I'm open to you. Samuel said, speak, Lord, your servant is listening in the Old Testament. And that's kind of what I say when I enter into these times of prayer. And it's amazing. There are a lot of ways God can respond to you. Maybe it's a feeling of peace. Maybe it's a twinge of conviction about something that you haven't prayed. Maybe it's a scripture or a passage that God brings to your mind that you can then go into the Word and start reading as you pray. There are a lot of different ways that God can respond. And I would just say, don't be discouraged if you don't hear or experience anything at first. Just keep opening up time for God to respond intentionally. And it's really amazing how He can meet you in that time. So, okay, this has been 6 practical tips for how to grow your prayer life. I talked fast because I wanted to get a lot in, so hopefully you guys followed. And if you want to read about all of this in more detail, or you want to share it with someone, you can share the PDF in the link below. Hope this has blessed you, and have a great day. Bye!